Welcome back to my videos. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to turn this open segment vessel, but I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to put a floating foot on it for one, and I'm going to do it in an entirely new way. Stay tuned. Let me show you how. Well, here's the project we're going to make. It starts off with a drawing that I got from Woodturner Pro's 3D Design Pro. From that I created a spreadsheet that gave me all the technical information I needed to complete this particular project. I'm going to build everything on faceplates, and in order to do that, I'm going to prepare several different faceplates. First of all, get them nice and flat and true. And to build the floating foot assembly the way I'm going to describe in this video, I'm first of all going to make a segmented ring that's a full 3/4 of an inch thick, and that's going to become the base of the project. So after we've got the glue block prepared, here's the ring that I'm going to glue to it. I'm using some of the new bead set glue from Franklin Adhesives, their Titebond brand, and we're going to glue this onto one of the face plates. I always wiggle the pieces a little bit to spread the glue and allow it to get a good tight bond. So after that has set for a little while, I'm going to true up the edge because the first thing I'm going to do is to take a parting tool to this ring. So I want to have a smooth running surface against which to place that parting tool. So true up the surface. And now I'm going to take a thin parting tool, one of the thinnest ones I have, and part off the top third of this 3/4 inch thick segmented ring. I'm going to try to go in as straight as I possibly can with this parting tool. The top third is going to be set aside for a little while, and we'll come back and use it later. Be sure to cut straight. The top surface of that ring has been flattened, so it's ready to be used later on. So we'll set it aside. It's nice if I could have caught it, but I forgot. So that'll be used in the next step. So this is going to become the base of the vessel, and I need to true that surface up from having been only cut with a parting tool. This is going to be a glue surface here in a couple of minutes, so we're going to flatten it and make it as true as we possibly can. And once we have that trued up, we'll sand it. The sanding stick is used on every single step of the project to be sure that pieces stay as lined and as flat as possible. In this case, I had to go back and touch the edge just a little bit more. Even gluing pieces together creates surfaces that may not necessarily be running true and would need to be re-squared. So once that has been flattened and squared off, I'm going to have to create a recess into which our floating foot will fit. Several tools could do this. I'm choosing to use an old skew chisel, which I'm laying flat on its side and using it like a negative rake scraper. And what I'm doing is cutting down into the remaining portion of this ring, no more than 1/8 of an inch, and to a fairly arbitrary diameter. I'm going to shoot for something about half of the diameter of that base ring. And I'm going to cut down in steps. I'm trying to go as straight as I possibly can, and I want to go about 1/8 of an inch deep. If you are new to doing processes like this, you might want to measure and assure yourself of your depths. I'm just going by eye. So once this is cut down, I'm also being sure that the outside edge is as square as I can get it. In other words, vertical to the horizontal axis of the lathe. So what you can't see behind my hand right now is I'm cutting down into the center of that and cleaning up the hole through that ring. That'll be visible from the bottom of the vessel when we get it finally assembled. So what we're doing here is creating a real flat surface. I'm making sure that it is dead flat. I'm also going to be sure that that edge, the corner, is as square as I can get it. So once that's done, the next thing to do is to take the calipers and actually take a measurement of that dimension. I need to know exactly what that diameter is, because I need to make a plug of a different species wood that'll drop down inside of that. Not a tight fit, but a loose fit. And as you can see, sitting on the lathe bed here is another faceplate with a contrasting piece of wood that's already been flattened on one face and turned round. And now what I need to do is to transfer that diameter that I just captured from the base to this piece of wood. The point now is to reduce its diameter so it'll fit down into that groove. The groove's about 1/8 of an inch deep, so I need to clean up the edge to a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. Again, checking to be sure the edge is square. Now, one of the things I always do on my pieces is to decorate the bottom. So I've grabbed my diamond point tool and I'm putting 3 consecutive rings on this piece. What you're looking at, this surface, is going to be the base and seen from the bottom of the vessel, so I'm decorating it. I use One Way Live Center systems a lot, simply because it has a lot of accessories that I can attach. In this case, it's a thread adapter that will allow me to move that piece over to the tailstock and maintain excellent alignment with the headstock. So I'm going to screw that onto there. I'm going to remount my base ring onto the headstock. Remember the one we just dug the groove in. And the point of this now is to glue in this insert. Now, I don't want a tight fit. I want a fairly loose fit, but I don't want it flopping around. So what I've chosen to do is put 2 little tiny drops of glue at 2 spots on that insert area. Now I'm going to rotate the insert piece so that the end grain of the fibers line up with those 2 spots of glue. And I'll push that in there, lock the tailstock in place, and wait for that glue to dry. Well, time has passed, glue's dried. Back to my thin parting tool to part off the excess of that surface that is above the level of that foot. And I'm just going to cut it free. Got it. And now I can take the tailstock away and put that face plate away for another project. I cut that off a little proud intentionally so I had room to work. I'm now flattening that surface so that it's flush with the 12 segment ring of oak that I had cut initially. Again, checking it's flat so it's not proud. And then once that is done, again, back to the sanding stick to assure the flatness of everything. Well, the floating foot is almost done. What's remaining now is to take the part of that ring that I cut off initially and remount it so that it captures that dark insert. That piece had a flat side when I parted it off, so I'm going to reverse it and put the flat side against the remaining surface. I didn't have a cone big enough to sit over this to fit, but I found that the One Way Live Center's larger cone is almost exactly the right diameter. And so I'm going to use it for both pressure and for alignment purposes to get those 2 pieces together. A little bit of pressure while the glue sets, but I want to be sure that it is lined as carefully as I possibly can. Another glue up is done. And the floating foot at this point is complete. So now we're going to build a vessel. And I'm going to start off by processing the wood that I need for this project. Bandsaw first to cut strips to the required segment edge and board width, and then I'm going to turn it 90 degrees and rip it to approximately the right thickness. I complete the thicknessing by going to my Performax and taking the wood down to a precise 3/8 inch. It also makes both sides of the stick very, very smooth and suitable for working through the rest of the steps. So I'll check it as I go, run a few strips at a time together, and once it's down to about 3/8 of an inch, I'm ready to go and work from my spreadsheet. Here I know everything I need to do the segments. I know first of all that I have a 3-degree window between these segments, which means my cut angle is going to be 5.5 degrees. So I set my sled at 5.5 degrees. I set my stop block for the right segment edge length, and I proceed to cut 24 segments. This is a 24 segment vessel. Each ring is going to require 24 little tiny segments like this. It's not as a perfect cut as it would be with the wedgie sled when I'm doing closed rings, but since the pieces don't touch each other directly, this is okay. Long as the angle is such that the sides appear parallel when I look into the vessel, then I'm going to be in good shape. So here we come with 24 segments, just flip and cut, flip and cut. And as soon as I get the 24th one done, I wait for the saw blade to come to a complete stop. There. And I'll transfer the pieces to a cup so I can go over and process them. This is oak. This whole vessel's cut in oak, which means each of these pieces have a tendency to get very, very splintery. So sanding each individual segment to get rid of all the burrs is an essential. A solid feature like one of these segments has 6 edges, each one of which has to individually be sanded. A little piece of 180 grit sandpaper. There's one done and 23 more to go. Well, ready to start building a vessel. So let's set up the lathe for open segment turning. I need an indexing wheel that will allow me to position the pieces individually at the right degree of rotation. 24 segments means I have to have at least 48 holes in the outside of this wheel so I can position one row every 24th hole and the next row offset by half and another 24 holes. So I've mounted that. I have another device that mounts the piece, allow me to glue it on at exactly the dead center of rotation of the lathe. The white piece on top allows me to set the radius so that when I glue the piece on at the right distance from the center, I'll end up with a diameter what's on the spreadsheet. The piece I'm installing now is simply a device that will engage each of the holes on the outside of this plate so that I can advance it properly. I'm just lining it up to engage the right hole. Well, let me show you what it looks like when we're installing a segment. I take the piece, I'm using a toothpick to put 2 slight, very thin lines of glue. I then advance the next hole on the indexing plate and install the segment. That's the way it's done. Each ring with 24 segments takes me approximately 25 to 30 minutes to complete. There's 2 rows done, 3 rows done, 4 rows done, and the base is completed with the 5th row. They don't go that fast, but there's no point in sitting and watching all of those segments get glued on one at a time. I know I'll lose your attention for sure. So then I do the same thing with the top as I just did with the bottom. Once all the segments are glued into place, flattened at the end of each round, I then am ready to mount the piece between centers again and turn the exterior shape. I tended to always mount the base of the piece on the headstock, And using my one-way live center system again, I'm using to mount the top of the vessel and its faceplate on the tailstock. Since both pieces have been flattened as they went along, there's a good match to the two parts. I'm rotating it, being sure that they are lined up. So the next thing to do is to turn the exterior of the vessel first, and then to come back and turn the interior second. It's my technique to do that. Now, one of the things that happens with open segment work is we have a lot of small corners that come around as we begin to turn. So I'm taking very, very light cuts the first 3 or 4 passes along with my bowl gouge. The purpose of which is simply to knock off all the corners as we come along. And once those corners are knocked off, I can increase the amount of pressure a little bit and the speed a little bit also. I don't want to catch a corner and rip a piece out. And so you'll see me taking very light cuts here. Another thing I do many times is to set up my dust collection right behind this turning activity because of the holes in the vessel. The little pieces tend to go flying a lot, and I'd rather have them flying up the dust collection tube rather than into my face, even with a face shield on. Now this is the base we're cutting towards right now, and you see I'm approaching the split ring into which we installed that floating foot. If you're not sure where the dimensions are and the size of that disc, you might be good to have some notes and keep track of this as you go. So we're shaping that a little bit. We move from the largest and the flattest portion of the vessel either direction, towards the headstock and towards the tailstock. This has a curve that comes down, and as we approach about 3/4 of the way up the vessel towards the neck, as I am now, there's a slight ogee reversal curve. So my handle's going to move back towards my body, and I'm going to create that ogee curve. Shear scraping to take care of any small errors in curvature as I can. As soon as that is done, I'll be ready to go ahead and grab the sandpaper in a couple minutes and complete the outside of the vessel. I always sand the outside of a project before I go inside, the purpose of which is to not only smooth up any difficulties in cutting and any bobbles from the tool, but also to create a surface that's smooth enough to allow me to run my hand on that surface when it's necessary to support the vessel while I am working on the inside. Thin walls, long distances from the support mechanism, many times needs a little mechanical support. And my tendency, since I only do small pieces, is to do that mechanical support with my hand. So I'm starting here with a piece of 180 grit sanding strip. This is the kind of material I tend to use because it conforms to the curvature and allows me to follow that curve very nicely. So I'll hollow out the inside, and once that's all done, we're ready then to assemble the pieces together, and I'm simply putting a little glue on each of the segments so that I can attach the top and the bottom together. After a drop is applied, I'm going to use my finger to spread it out in such a way that the glue is pulled towards the outside of the vessel. I don't want to have any squeeze out on the inside. I don't mind it on the outside where I can sand it away later on. So we'll spread the glue, be sure everything is fine, and once that's done, we're ready to glue the two halves together. Again, I'm going to use my one-way live center system as a means of supporting the pieces and getting the alignment just right. There's always a little bit of give in the systems and in the tailstock and in the headstock, so we want to make sure everything is tight and well aligned and as perfect as I can get it. I can sand off a very small error if I have it. My hope is that I can line the pieces well enough that I don't have any little errors to sand away. So that's done. And now, after that glue dries, our next step here is to part off the tailstock end, which is the neck of the vessel. Again, thin parting tool, light cuts, and we'll separate the glue block from that portion of the project. Once that's parted off, as it is now, all I need to do then is to do any cleanup of that neck area. Many times I'm not able to get the inside of the neck perfect because it's right up against that glue block, and I may have to make a few cuts in order to complete that. Well, once that's done, I'll take the whole project, less the piece of sandpaper I lost down inside, and move the project to the tailstock. I now have to part off the next glue block, which is only holding the whole project together now. So I need some way to support that. And what I'm going to do is to use a chuck with what I call number 1 jaws, very small ones. The base of those jaws is not a perfect alignment surface, but it's pretty doggone good. And what I'm going to end up doing is pushing the vessel all the way up against that, using that for a reference surface, and then expanding the jaws into the neck of the vessel. Now be cautious that you don't over tighten and damage the vessel. But now we're back between centers again, and it'll be very easy to part off this portion. Now I'm aiming the tool, the parting tool, as you can see, at a very slight angle from the base of the base in towards the center. Creates a little bit of a cupping of that base when I part it. Be again cautious. Remember, there's only about 1/8 of an inch between where the parting tool is now and where that colored plug is located. So I part that off very carefully. And once it's separated, which will happen here any second, there it is. I'm going to pull that away, and while we're still running, get that out of the way so I have a little bit of clearance and room to work. I've got a sharp bed lathe, so I don't have a lot of extra space for my elbows. I'm going to take that little piece of sandpaper, and I'm going to clean up anything from that parting cut. I could use a tool in there, but in this particular case, my cut was clean enough that I did not need to apply a tool. I can simply do it with a piece of 180 grit sandpaper. So I'm just sanding that area where the cut was made. I'm trying to be careful and not touch the dark plug that we installed in the very beginning. Once that's sanded, I'll take that piece of sandpaper up around the corner, just kind of break that corner just a little bit. Go to a little finer grit here to finish it off. I think this is 220 to complete. And up around the corner, and we basically have completed the vessel. So once that's done, it's simply a matter now of taking it off of the faceplate, not the faceplate, out of the chuck jaws, and calling it done. So here is our project complete, and before we put any finish on it, I am going to finish it with Minwax wipe-on poly, but because of the holes that all have to be covered too, I'm going to dump the poly into a small bowl and dunk the project so I can get it on all the various different surfaces. There's what the bottom looks like, and here's what the bottom looks like from the inside. Done. Used our own cutting sheet to get there, and I hope that this project with a floating foot is something new to you, and you'll give it a try. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end. Give us your comments, and please subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.